The stagecoach lurched to a stop with such violence that Catherine Keller's carpetbag flew from her lap and struck the opposite wall, spilling half its contents across the dusty floor. She scrambled to gather her belongings while the driver's gruff voice bellowed from above that this was Brownsville, Texas, and she had exactly 2 minutes to disembark before he continued on his route. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she shoved her hairbrush, spare stockings, and a small leather journal back into the bag. This couldn't be right. Her ticket clearly stated she was to arrive in Brownfield, not Brownsville, but when she tried to explain this through the window, the driver had already begun unhitching the horses for a fresh team. "Sir, please," Catherine called, stepping down onto the wooden platform that served as Brownsville's sorry excuse for a stage depot. "There's been a terrible mistake. I was supposed to go to Brownfield to meet my Aunt Martha. This isn't my destination." The driver, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth and a permanent squint, barely glanced her way. "Lady, I got a schedule to keep. You bought a ticket to Brownsville, so here you are. Next stage east won't come through for another 2 weeks. 2 weeks." Catherine's voice pitched higher than she intended. "But I specifically asked for Brownfield. You must have misheard me in San Antonio." "Don't matter what I heard. Paper says Brownsville, and Brownsville is where you get off." He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dusty street. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I got paying customers waiting in Corpus Christi." Before Catherine could protest further, the stage driver cracked his whip and the fresh team of horses lurched forward, leaving her standing alone on the platform with nothing but her carpetbag, the dress on her back, and approximately $7 in her reticule. The year was 1882. She was 23 years old, and she was stranded in a town she'd never intended to visit, hundreds of miles from her destination. Catherine looked around at Brownsville with growing dismay. The July sun beat down mercilessly on the small border town, turning the air thick and heavy as molasses. The main street stretched before her in a ribbon of packed earth, lined with ramshackle wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. A saloon with a faded sign stood directly across from her, next to what appeared to be a general store. Further down, she could make out a church steeple and several more commercial establishments, but the whole town couldn't have been more than a few blocks in any direction. She was about to pick up her bag and search for the town marshal when a voice spoke behind her, rich and warm as honey whiskey. "That driver has a habit of mixing up his destinations when he's been sampling his own flask." Catherine whirled around to find a man leaning against the depot's support post, arms crossed over a broad chest. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the collar and eyes the color of summer grass. He wore typical cowboy attire: worn denim pants, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, scuffed leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back to reveal his sun-bronzed face. A gun belt sat low on his hips, but there was nothing threatening in his posture, only a sort of lazy amusement that made Catherine bristle despite herself. "I beg your pardon," she said stiffly, adjusting her bonnet with one gloved hand. "Name's Harrison Dalton," he said, pushing away from the post and extending his hand. "And I couldn't help but overhear your predicament. Jimmy Preston, the driver, he's notorious for this kind of thing. Last month he dropped a cattle buyer in Laredo instead of El Paso. Cost the man a significant business deal." Catherine reluctantly shook his hand, noting the calluses and the firm but gentle grip. "Catherine Keller. And while I appreciate the information, Mr. Dalton, it doesn't solve my current problem. I need to get to Brownfield, and apparently I'm stranded here for a fortnight." Harrison's green eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Brownfield's a far piece from here, Miss Keller. You got family there, my Aunt Martha. She's expecting me to help her run her boarding house." Catherine tried to keep the frustration from her voice but failed. "I've been traveling for 3 days from Charleston, and now I'm stuck in the wrong town with barely enough money to survive until the next stage comes through." "Well now," Harrison said slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, "I'd say that's unfortunate except for one thing." "And what would that be?" "This town has me in it now." Catherine blinked at him, unsure whether to be offended or charmed by his audacity. "I fail to see how that improves my situation, Mr. Dalton. Harrison, please. And it improves your situation because I happen to know everyone in Brownsville, including Mrs. Rodriguez, who runs the boarding house on 3rd Street. She always needs help, especially this time of year when the cattle drives come through. I could introduce you, see about getting you a room and some work until you can sort out your travel arrangements." "I couldn't possibly impose," Catherine began, but her stomach chose that moment to rumble loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since dawn. Harrison's smile widened. "Sounds like you could also use some lunch. The cantina down the street makes the best enchiladas this side of the Rio Grande." "My treat, seeing as how our incompetent stage driver left you in such a predicament." Catherine hesitated. Her mother would have been scandalized at the thought of her accepting charity from a strange man, but her mother wasn't here, and Catherine's options were severely limited. Besides, there was something about Harrison Dalton that felt trustworthy, despite his forward manner. Perhaps it was the kindness in his eyes or the way he kept a respectful distance despite his friendly demeanor. "Very well," she said finally. "But I insist on repaying you once I'm able to find employment. Deal?" Harrison reached down and picked up her carpet bag before she could protest. "Come on then. Let's get you fed and situated. Brownsville might not be where you intended to end up, Miss Keller, but I promise it's not the worst place to be stranded." As they walked down the dusty Main Street, Catherine became more aware of her surroundings. Brownsville sat right on the border with Mexico, and the town reflected that unique position. The architecture showed Spanish influence in the adobe buildings mixed among the wooden structures. She heard Spanish and English spoken in equal measure from the people they passed. The Rio Grande flowed just beyond the southern edge of town, and the air carried the scent of river water mixed with dust, mesquite, and cooking spices. "How long have you lived here?" Catherine asked as they walked. "All my life," Harrison replied. "My father came down from Tennessee back in the 50s before the war. He started a ranch about 10 miles north of town, raised cattle and horses. He died 5 years back, and I've been running the place ever since." "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. He was a good man. Taught me everything I know about ranching, horses, and treating people fairly." Harrison nodded to a Mexican woman sweeping the porch of a small house, and she waved back with a smile. "What about you? What brings a Charleston lady all the way out to the wilds of Texas?" Catherine chose her words carefully. "My father passed away this spring. He left some debts, and the house had to be sold to settle them. My Aunt Martha wrote and offered me a place with her in Brownfield. She's a widow with no children, and she thought we might help each other. That's rough." "I'm sorry." Harrison's voice carried genuine sympathy. "But you've got spine, I can tell. Takes courage to travel halfway across the country alone." They reached the cantina, a cheerful building painted bright yellow with a shaded porch. The interior was cooler than the street, with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the heat. Harrison guided her to a table near a window and ordered for both of them in fluent Spanish. The proprietor, a round woman with streaks of gray in her black hair, beamed at Harrison and gave Catherine a curious but friendly look. While they waited for their food, Harrison told her about Brownsville. The town had been founded about 40 years ago and had seen its share of conflict during the Mexican-American War and then the Civil War. Now, it was primarily a ranching and farming community, with some trade coming through from Mexico. The population was a mix of white settlers, Mexicans who had lived in the area for generations, and a small but growing number of freed slaves who had moved west after the war seeking opportunities. "It's not fancy like Charleston, I imagine," Harrison said, "but it's a good place. People generally look out for each other, regardless of where they come from." The food arrived, and Catherine discovered that Harrison hadn't exaggerated about the enchiladas. They were delicious, rich with spices she couldn't identify but savored nonetheless. As they ate, she found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. Harrison had an easy way about him, asking questions without being intrusive, sharing stories that made her laugh despite her worries. "So what do you do on your ranch?" she asked between bites. "Mostly cattle, but I've got a side business breeding horses. Good cow ponies are always in demand, and I've built up a reputation for training smart, steady mounts." His eyes lit up when he talked about his horses, and Catherine noticed how his whole demeanor changed, becoming more animated. "Got a 3-year-old gelding right now, prettiest gray you ever saw, smart as a whip. I've been working with him for months and he's about ready to sell. Breaks my heart every time I have to let one go, but that's the business." "You really love it," Catherine observed. "I do. There's something about working with horses, earning their trust, teaching them. It's honest work." He paused, then grinned. "Listen to me going on. You probably think I'm some kind of horse-obsessed lunatic." "Not at all," Catherine said, surprised to realize she meant it. "It's refreshing to hear someone talk about their work with such passion. Most of the men I knew back home only cared about business profits and social standing." "Well, I care about profits too," Harrison admitted. "Can't run a ranch without them, but there's more to life than just money." After lunch, Harrison kept his promise and took her to meet Mrs. Rodriguez. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a wide porch and a neat garden out front. Mrs. Rodriguez turned out to be a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, but she softened when Harrison explained Catherine's situation. "I can always use help," Mrs. Rodriguez said, looking Catherine up and down. "Especially someone with good manners and education. Most girls around here are rough as corn cobs. You can cook." "Yes, madam. And clean, do laundry, mend clothes, keep accounts." "Accounts?" Mrs. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose. "You can cipher." "I can read, write, and do mathematics. My father believed in education for daughters as well as sons." "Smart man." "All right, Miss Keller, here's my offer. You help me run this place and I'll give you room and board plus $2 a week. It's hard work, mind you. I've got 8 rooms and during cattle season they're all full of dusty, demanding cowboys. But I treat my girls fair and I don't tolerate any nonsense from the boarders." $2 a week wasn't much, but combined with room and board, it would allow Catherine to save enough for proper stage fare to Brownfield. "I accept, Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you. Call me Senora Rosa. Everyone does." "Come on, I'll show you your room." Harrison touched the brim of his hat. "I'll leave you ladies to it then. Miss Keller, if you need anything, I'm usually in town on Saturdays for supplies. The general store always knows how to reach me." "Thank you, Harrison, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without your help." His smile was warm and genuine. "My pleasure, Catherine. Welcome to Brownsville." Over the next several days, Catherine threw herself into work at the boarding house. Senora Rosa hadn't exaggerated about it being hard labor. Catherine rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast, spent the morning cleaning rooms and doing laundry. the afternoon cooking and mending, and the evening serving supper and cleaning up afterward. By the time she collapsed into her small but clean room each night, every muscle ached and her hands were raw despite the lotion Senora Rosa provided. But there were compensations. The other girl who worked at the boarding house, a Mexican teenager named Maria, was friendly and patient as she taught Catherine to make tortillas and other regional dishes. The boarders were mostly respectful, and the few who weren't learned quickly that Senora Rosa tolerated no impropriety. Catherine began to learn Spanish, picking up words and phrases from Maria and the Spanish-speaking boarders. And every evening after the work was done, she would sit on the porch and write in her journal, recording her experiences in this strange new place. She thought about Harrison more than she cared to admit. The cowboy had been true to his word about not imposing himself, but she found herself looking for him every Saturday when she went to the general store for Senora Rosa. Sometimes she saw him, and he would tip his hat and ask how she was settling in. Once he helped her carry heavy sacks of flour and sugar back to the boarding house. Another time he invited her to watch the church socials dance from the sidelines, though she'd been too tired to attend. 3 weeks after her arrival in Brownsville, Catherine was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard the thunder of hooves and men shouting. She dropped the sheet she'd been pinning and ran around to the front of the house in time to see a group of riders racing down the main street, firing guns in the air. Senora Rosa pulled her back onto the porch just as one of the riders wheeled his horse around and fired again. "Get inside," Senora Rosa ordered. "It's just cowboys from one of the ranches, drunk and causing trouble. The marshal will sort them out." But before the marshal could arrive, one of the riders lost control of his horse. The animal, spooked by the gunfire and the shouting, reared and threw his rider, then bolted straight toward the boarding house porch. Catherine froze, unable to move as half a ton of terrified horseflesh charged directly at her. Then Harrison was there, seemingly out of nowhere, throwing himself between Catherine and the horse. He grabbed the trailing reins and used his own body weight to turn the animal away from the porch. The horse fought him, eyes rolling white with fear, but Harrison held firm, speaking low and steady until the animal calmed enough to stop fighting. Catherine's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. Senora Rosa rushed to her side while Harrison handed the horse off to the now sober rider and came to check on her. "Are you all right?" He knelt in front of her, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. "Catherine, look at me. Are you hurt?" She managed to shake her head. "I'm fine, just frightened. That horse if you hadn't. But I did. You're safe." His green eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch for entirely different reasons. "I was across the street at the saddlery when I heard the commotion. I've never run so fast in my life." The marshal arrived then and hauled the rowdy cowboys off to cool down in jail, but Harrison stayed on the porch with Catherine until her shaking stopped. Senora Rosa brought them both coffee, and Maria whispered something to her employer in rapid Spanish that made the older woman smile knowingly. "You're staying for supper," Senora Rosa told Harrison firmly. "I won't hear any arguments. You saved this girl's life and the least I can do is feed you properly." Harrison glanced at Catherine, who nodded. "Please stay. I'd like the company." That evening marked a turning point in their relationship. Over Senora Rosa's excellent carne asada, Harrison and Catherine talked for hours. He told her more about his life on the ranch, about the challenges of managing a property largely alone with just 2 hired hands. She told him about growing up in Charleston, about her father's bookshop, and how she'd spent her childhood surrounded by stories and learning. I always wanted to see more of the world, Catherine admitted. Charleston was beautiful, but it felt small sometimes. Everyone knew everyone, and there were so many rules about what a lady could and couldn't do. And what do you think of Texas so far? Harrison asked. Catherine considered the question seriously. It's harsh and beautiful at the same time. The landscape is so different from what I knew, all this open space and endless sky. And the people are different too. More direct, I think. Less concerned with social niceties and more focused on just living. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Good, I think. It's refreshing. She met his eyes across the table. You're different from the men I knew back home. You actually listen when I talk, and you don't treat me like I'm made of porcelain. Harrison's expression grew serious. Catherine, I need to be honest with you about something. Her heart skipped. What is it? I haven't just been happening by on Saturdays. I've been coming to town specifically to see you. He held up a hand when she started to speak. I know you're planning to leave for Brownsville as soon as you can arrange it, and I know we've only known each other for a few weeks. But I can't stop thinking about you. You're smart and brave and beautiful, and when I saw that horse charging at you today, I realized something. What did you realize? Catherine's voice came out barely above a whisper. That I'm falling in love with you. And I know that's probably the last thing you want to hear, stuck as you are in a town you never meant to be in with plans to go somewhere else. But I had to tell you the truth. He stood up from the table, his hat in his hands. I should go. Thank you for supper, Senora Rosa. Catherine, I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. Catherine stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Harrison, wait. He turned back, hope and uncertainty warring on his face. I think, Catherine said carefully, her heart pounding, that I might be falling in love with you too. And I don't know what to do about it because you're right. I'm supposed to go to Brownsville and my aunt is expecting me. And I've only known you for 3 weeks, which is ridiculous. And I don't make decisions based on emotions. Except apparently I do now. And Harrison crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. Breathe, Catherine, just breathe. She did, drawing in a shaky breath and letting it out slowly. I'm terrified, she admitted. Everything has changed so quickly, and I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. Then don't jump alone, Harrison said softly. Let me jump with you. Stay in Brownsville, Catherine. Give us a chance to see where this goes. If it doesn't work out, if you decide you want to leave, I'll personally drive you to Brownsville and make sure you get there safely. But please, at least give us a chance. Catherine looked up into his face at the hope and vulnerability she saw there and made a decision that would have shocked her careful, practical Charleston self. All right, I'll stay. But I need to write to my aunt and explain. She deserves to know that I'm safe and where I am. Harrison's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Write her tonight. I'll make sure the letter gets posted first thing in the morning. From that night on, Harrison courted Catherine properly. He came to town 3 times a week instead of just Saturdays, always bringing some small gift. Wildflowers he'd picked on the ride in, a book he thought she'd enjoy, fresh vegetables from his ranch garden. He took her on walks along the river in the evening when the heat of the day had passed, always with Maria or Senora Rosa as a chaperone. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. Catherine learned that Harrison wanted to expand his horse breeding operation, and maybe buy the adjacent property if it ever came up for sale. Harrison learned that Catherine had always dreamed of opening a small school, teaching children to read and love books the way she did. They argued good-naturedly about politics and laughed over shared jokes. And slowly, carefully, they fell deeper in love. A month after their conversation at supper, Harrison invited Catherine to visit his ranch. Senora Rosa agreed to let Maria accompany them as a chaperone, and they set out early one Saturday morning in Harrison's wagon. The ranch was everything Catherine had imagined and more. The house itself was modest, a sturdy wooden structure with a wide porch and a view of the rolling prairie. Behind it stood a barn, several corrals, and a small bunkhouse for the hired hands. But what caught Catherine's attention were the horses. At least 24 animals grazed in the various pastures, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. "That's quite a herd," Catherine said as Harrison helped her down from the wagon. "This is just the breeding stock and the youngsters in training. The rest are out on the range with the cattle." Harrison's pride in his operation was evident. "Come on, I'll introduce you to my pride and joy." He led her to a smaller corral where a magnificent gray gelding stood watching them with intelligent eyes. The horse was tall and well-muscled, with a coat that looked like silver in the sunlight. "This is Stormcloud," Harrison said, climbing over the fence and approaching the horse with an outstretched hand. The gelding came to him immediately, nuzzling Harrison's palm. "The one I told you about that first day. He's finally ready to sell, but I'm having a hard time letting him go." Catherine watched as Harrison worked with the horse, demonstrating the animal's training and responsiveness. The bond between man and horse was obvious, and she felt a pang of sympathy for Harrison's dilemma. "Maybe you shouldn't sell him," she suggested. "Keep him for yourself." "Can't afford to get sentimental in this business," Harrison replied, but his hand lingered on the horse's neck. "Besides, I've got a buyer coming next week who'll give him a good home, a rancher up north who needs a smart cow pony." They spent the rest of the morning exploring the ranch. Harrison's 2 hired hands, both Mexican men who'd worked for his father, greeted Catherine with friendly respect. She met the other horses, admired the vegetable garden that one of the hands maintained, and even helped feed the chickens. When the midday heat became oppressive, they retreated to the house for lunch. The interior of Harrison's home was neat but sparse, clearly the domain of a bachelor. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and dust gathered in corners that a woman's touch would have banished. But there was a beautiful fireplace built from river stones, and the windows let in plenty of light. Catherine could see the potential in the space, could imagine curtains and rugs and the small touches that would make it a real home. "It's not much," Harrison said, noticing her surveying the room. "I know it needs work." "It has good bones," Catherine replied diplomatically, "and that fireplace is lovely." Over lunch, Maria made herself scarce in the kitchen, giving Catherine and Harrison a semblance of privacy. Harrison reached across the table and took Catherine's hand. "I want you to see something," he said. "Come with me." He led her to a small room at the back of the house that he'd been using for storage. "When my father built this place, he intended this to be a study or a library, but we never had enough books to justify it, so it just became a catch-all." He gestured at the boxes and equipment crowding the space. "But I was thinking, if you wanted, we could fix it up. Put in shelves, get proper furniture. Maybe even use it for teaching if you wanted to start giving lessons to some of the local children." Catherine stared at him, her throat tight with emotion. "Harrison, why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm hoping that someday, maybe not today or even this year, but someday you might want to make this house a home. Our home." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know it's too soon to talk about marriage, but I want you to know what I'm hoping for. A future with you here, building something together." Catherine couldn't speak for a moment. She thought about the life she'd left behind in Charleston, the one she'd been planning in Brownsville, and the one that was unfolding here in Brownsville. She thought about Harrison's kindness, his steady nature, the way he made her laugh and challenged her thinking. She thought about the feeling that bloomed in her chest every time she saw him, warm and bright and terrifying in its intensity. I'm hoping for that too, she whispered. Harrison's kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The return trip to town was filled with excited planning, though they both agreed to take things slowly. Catherine still had her position at the boarding house, and Harrison had his ranch to run. But now they had a shared vision of the future, something to work toward together. 2 days later, everything changed. Catherine was in the kitchen helping prepare supper when Senora Rosa came in with a telegram. The older woman's face was grave as she handed the paper to Catherine. "It came for you this afternoon," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Mija." Catherine's hands shook as she read the telegram. It was from her Aunt Martha's lawyer in Brownsville. Her aunt had suffered a stroke 3 weeks ago and had passed away 2 days prior. The boarding house had been sold to pay debts, and there was nothing left for Catherine to inherit. The lawyer expressed his condolences and advised her to make other arrangements for her future. Catherine read the telegram 3 times, unable to process the words. Her aunt, the woman who had offered her a home and a future, was dead. And she died while Catherine was here in Brownsville, falling in love and building a new life, completely unaware of her aunt's suffering. "Oh, sweetheart," Senora Rosa said, gathering Catherine into her arms as the tears finally came. "I'm so sorry." The guilt was overwhelming. If she had insisted on going to Brownfield immediately, if she hadn't let herself be stranded in the wrong town, if she hadn't stayed for Harrison, she might have been there when her aunt needed her. Instead, she'd been here, happy and in love, while her last living relative died alone. Harrison came as soon as he heard the news. He found Catherine sitting on the boarding house porch in the evening darkness, her eyes red from crying. "Catherine," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "Senora Rosa told me. I'm so sorry." "I should have been there," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "She was alone, Harrison. She reached out to help me, and I abandoned her for a town and a man I just met. What kind of person does that make me? It makes you human. You couldn't have known what would happen. But I should have tried harder to get to her. Instead, I let myself be distracted by—" She gestured between them helplessly. "By all of this, by you." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Do you regret it? Staying here, I mean, being with me, did she?" Catherine tried to examine her feelings honestly. She'd been genuinely falling in love with Harrison, had been imagining a future in Brownsville. But now, knowing what had happened to her aunt, everything felt tainted by guilt and grief. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what I feel right now except sad and guilty and confused." "That's understandable." Harrison reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "Take whatever time you need, Catherine. I'm not going anywhere." Over the next week, Catherine moved through her duties at the boarding house like a ghost. She cooked and cleaned mechanically, spoke when spoken to, and spent her free time alone in her room. Harrison came by every day, but she struggled to engage with him. The joy that had been blooming between them felt wrong now, disrespectful to her aunt's memory. It was Senora Rosa who finally forced the issue. She cornered Catherine in the kitchen one morning and fixed her with a stern look. "Enough of this, Mija. You're grieving, and that's natural. But you're also punishing yourself and that good man who loves you, and for what? For being human." "I should have been there," Catherine repeated, the phrase that had become her constant refrain. "Maybe. Or maybe you would have arrived to find her already gone. Or maybe you would have been killed by bandits on the road, or died of fever, or any of 1,000 other things that could have happened." Senora Rosa took Catherine's hands firmly. "Life is uncertain, Catherine. We make the best choices we can with the information we have. You didn't know your aunt was sick. You couldn't have known." But I stayed here for the wrong reasons. I stayed because of Harrison, not because it was the right thing to do. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with choosing love and happiness when it's offered to you?" Senora Rosa's eyes softened. "Your aunt wrote to offer you a home because she wanted you to be happy and safe. Do you think she would want you to throw away your chance at love out of misplaced guilt?" Catherine wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Would Aunt Martha have wanted her to suffer? No. The aunt she remembered from childhood visits, the one who'd always slipped her extra sweets and told her stories, would have wanted Catherine to be happy. "I'm scared," Catherine whispered. "Everything is happening so fast, and I don't know if I'm making the right choices. No one ever knows for certain, but I'll tell you what I see. I see a good man who looks at you like you hung the moon. I see a smart woman who's found a place where she can build a real life. And I see two people who could be very happy together if they stop being so afraid." Senora Rosa patted her cheek. "Talk to Harrison, Mija. Really talk to him. Don't let fear and guilt steal your future." That evening, Catherine sent word to Harrison asking him to meet her by the river. He came immediately, his face showing the strain of the past week. "I'm sorry," Catherine said before he could speak. "I've been pulling away from you, and that's not fair. You've been nothing but kind and patient, and I've been shutting you out." "You're grieving," Harrison said. "I understand." "Maybe, but that's not an excuse to hurt you." Catherine took a deep breath. "I need to know something, Harrison. Are you sure about this? About us? We've only known each other for 2 months. What if I'm just a distraction, or what if we're caught up in the romance of it all and it's not real?" Harrison stepped closer, his hands coming up to cup her face gently. "Catherine, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Yes, we've only known each other for a short time, but in that time I've learned who you are. You're strong and smart and brave. You left everything you knew to come west and make a new life. You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You treat everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of where they come from. And you make me want to be a better man." "But what if it's not enough?" Catherine's voice broke. "What if I'm not enough? I don't know anything about ranching or living out here. I can barely make tortillas without burning them. What if you wake up one day and realize you've made a terrible mistake?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Harrison said firmly. "Catherine, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to take a chance on us, to believe that what we have is worth fighting for." Catherine looked up into his face at the love and determination she saw there and felt something shift inside her. The guilt and fear didn't disappear entirely, but they became manageable, overshadowed by the warmth of hope. "I want to believe that," she said. "I want to believe in us." "Then do, and let me prove to you every day that you made the right choice." This time when Harrison kissed her, Catherine let herself fully feel it. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you," Catherine said. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I do. I love you, Harrison Dalton." "I love you too, Catherine Keller, more than I thought possible." Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. Not today or even next month, but soon. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." They decided to wait 3 months before the wedding, partially out of respect for Catherine's mourning period and partially to give them time to plan properly. Senora Rosa was delighted by the engagement and immediately began plotting the celebration. Maria squealed with excitement and started embroidering linens for Catherine's trousseau. Even the boarders congratulated them, and several of the Mexican women in town offered to help Catherine prepare for married life. During those 3 months, Catherine's life transformed in ways she never could have anticipated. She continued working at the boarding house, but began spending her free days at the ranch, learning about Harrison's operation and making plans for their shared future. Harrison was endlessly patient as he taught her about horses and cattle, laughing good-naturedly when she mixed up terminology or made beginner's mistakes. "You're doing fine," he assured her one afternoon when she got frustrated trying to saddle a horse. "Nobody expects you to become an expert rancher overnight." "But I want to be helpful, not a burden," Catherine protested. "You could never be a burden. Besides, you're already helping more than you know." Harrison gestured toward the house, where Catherine had spent the previous weekend cleaning and organizing. "The place already feels more like a home, and the hands are eating better now that you've been teaching them some of your recipes." It was true that Catherine had found her own ways to contribute. She'd reorganized Harrison's chaotic record-keeping system, making it easier to track expenses and income. She'd started a more extensive garden, planting vegetables and herbs that would improve their diet. And she'd begun teaching reading lessons twice a week to local children, including the ranch hands' kids, using the small room Harrison had shown her that first day. The children came eagerly, hungry for learning in a place where formal schools were scarce. Catherine taught them letters and numbers, read them stories, and delighted in their progress. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond just preparing to be Harrison's wife, a reminder that she had value and skills independent of her relationship. As the wedding date approached, Catherine received letters from two of her childhood friends in Charleston. They were shocked that she was marrying a cowboy in Texas, a man she'd known for only a few months. Their disapproval stung, but Catherine realized she no longer cared what Charleston society thought. She was building a new life on her own terms, and it felt right in a way her old life never had. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning at the little church in Brownsville. Catherine wore a simple but elegant dress that Senora Rosa and Maria had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Harrison wore a new suit that he'd ordered special from San Antonio, though he insisted on keeping his cowboy boots. The church was packed with townspeople, ranch hands, and Mexican families who'd come to know Catherine through her teaching. As Catherine walked down the aisle on Senora Rosa's arm, having no father to give her away, she felt a moment of pure clarity. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not in Charleston living a life dictated by social expectations. Not in Brownfield running a boarding house for her aunt, but here in Brownsville, marrying a good man who loved her, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her. Harrison's eyes shone with emotion as she reached him at the altar. The minister, a kind man who'd known Harrison since birth, led them through their vows. When Harrison slipped a simple gold band on Catherine's finger, she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said with a broad smile. "Harrison, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was chaste given their audience, but it held the promise of deeper passion to come. As they turned to face their cheering friends and neighbors, Catherine caught sight of her reflection in one of the church's windows. She looked different from the frightened, stranded woman who'd arrived in Brownsville 5 months ago. She looked happy. She looked home. The celebration afterward was lively and joyful, with food, music, and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Catherine danced with Harrison, with Senora Rosa's husband who'd come in from their ranch for the occasion, with several of the town's leading citizens, and even with Maria's young sweetheart who was too shy to ask Maria himself. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Harrison pulled Catherine aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Dalton, Mrs. Dalton." Catherine tested the name in her mind and found she liked it. "Yes, let's go home." They drove to the ranch under a sky full of stars, the wagon carrying not just them, but the gifts and household goods that friends had contributed. When they arrived, Harrison insisted on carrying Catherine over the threshold, nearly dropping her when she laughed and squirmed in his arms. Their wedding night was sweet and awkward and perfect, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Harrison was gentle and patient, making sure Catherine felt cherished and safe. When they finally fell asleep tangled together in Harrison's bed, Catherine felt more content than she'd ever been in her life. Married life brought new challenges and joys. Catherine learned to manage a household on a working ranch, which was vastly different from working at a boarding house in town. She got up before dawn to make breakfast for Harrison and the hands, packed lunches for men heading out to work cattle, and kept the house clean despite the constant intrusion of dust and dirt tracked in on boots. She also learned to ride properly. Harrison was a patient teacher, starting her on his gentlest mare and gradually building her confidence and skills. Within a few months, Catherine could ride out to check on pastures with Harrison, could help move cattle when extra hands were needed, and could even help with basic horse training. But she also maintained her own interests and contributions. The reading school grew as word spread, and she soon had 15 regular students of varying ages. She convinced Harrison to let her order books from a catalog, slowly building a small library that children and adults alike could borrow from. And she continued to keep the ranch's accounts, discovering that she had a knack for business that helped Harrison make better decisions about when to sell cattle or horses. Their first year of marriage wasn't without difficulties. Money was tight at times, especially during a dry spell that summer that hurt their grazing lands. Catherine learned about the harsh realities of ranch life when a prize mare died during a difficult foaling, taking her colt with her. She watched Harrison grieve for the animals and then pick himself up and keep going, and she learned to do the same. They also had their first real fight that August. Harrison had made a business decision without consulting Catherine, selling off some breeding stock she'd thought they were keeping. She felt excluded and disrespected, and they argued fiercely about it. But they worked through it, with Harrison acknowledging that she was his partner in all things and promising to consult her on major decisions. Catherine learned that being married meant sometimes disagreeing, but always coming back together. By their first anniversary, they'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. Catherine had transformed the ranch house into a real home, with curtains and rugs and small decorative touches that made the space warm and inviting. She'd planted flowers around the porch and expanded the vegetable garden significantly. Harrison had built proper shelves for her growing book collection and had added a second room onto the house specifically for her teaching. They were sitting on the porch one October evening, watching the sunset, when Catherine shared the news she'd been holding onto for a week. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Harrison's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, spinning her around until she begged him to stop before she got dizzy. "When?" he asked, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "The midwife thinks early May, spring baby." Catherine covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it, terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once. Harrison kissed her forehead. "You're going to be an amazing mother, and you'll be a wonderful father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Catherine had to cut back on some of her more strenuous activities as she grew larger. Senora Rosa came out to the ranch regularly to check on her, bringing advice and supplies and endless stories about raising children. Maria, now married to her young sweetheart and pregnant herself, commiserated about the discomforts and shared her excitement about their children growing up together. Harrison was attentive to the point of being comically overprotective. He worried constantly about Catherine overdoing it, tried to ban her from riding entirely, and drove her to distraction with his hovering. But she could see the love and fear behind his behavior. He'd lost his own mother when he was young, and the prospect of losing Catherine terrified him. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one April morning when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." "I know that logically," Harrison admitted, "but the thought of anything happening to you or the baby—" Catherine took his face in her hands. "Nothing is going to happen. I'm healthy, the baby is strong, and we have the midwife ready to come at a moment's notice. You need to trust that everything will be all right." "I trust you," Harrison said. "It's the universe I don't trust." Their son was born on a warm May morning after a labor that lasted just 8 hours. Harrison paced the porch while Senora Rosa and the midwife attended Catherine, nearly wearing a hole in the floorboards with his anxiety. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the bedroom despite Senora Rosa's protests. "Is she?" Harrison stopped when he saw Catherine sitting up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfect. Come meet your son." Catherine pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" Harrison approached slowly, as if afraid the vision might disappear. When he finally took the baby in his arms, his whole face transformed with wonder. "He's so small. And perfect. Catherine, we made this perfect little person." They named him Henry James Dalton, after Harrison's father and Catherine's father. Young Henry was a good baby, relatively calm and easy, though he had strong opinions about feeding times that he expressed at high volume. Catherine fell into the exhausting but rewarding routine of new motherhood, nursing and changing and marveling at every tiny development. Harrison was a devoted father from the start. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved small toys for when Henry was older, and spent hours just watching his son sleep. He adjusted the ranch schedule so he could be home more, delegating tasks to the hands and making sure he was present for supper and bedtime every night. When Henry was 3 months old, Catherine resumed her teaching sessions, though on a reduced schedule. She brought Henry with her, letting the children take turns holding him gently and reading to him. The older girls especially loved helping with the baby, and Catherine found herself teaching informal lessons about infant care alongside reading and arithmetic. Life settled into a new pattern. The ranch continued to thrive, with Harrison's reputation for quality horses growing throughout the region. Catherine's school became a fixture in the community, with parents praising the education their children were receiving. And the Dalton family became known for their hospitality, often hosting Sunday dinners or community gatherings at the ranch. When Henry was 18 months old, Catherine became pregnant again. This time she was less anxious, knowing what to expect, though Harrison's protectiveness returned in full force. Their daughter, Emma Rose Dalton, was born in January during a rare cold snap that left frost on the windows. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at the temperature and didn't stop expressing her opinions from that day forward. "She's got your determination," Harrison said fondly when Emma was a few weeks old and refusing to sleep, despite being obviously tired. "And your stubbornness," Catherine countered, rocking the fussy baby. With 2 children, life became even more chaotic but also more richly rewarding. Henry was a gentle, curious child who followed his father around the ranch asking endless questions. Emma was fierce and fearless, crawling early and getting into everything. Catherine learned to manage a household, raise children, teach school and help with ranch operations, often wondering how she'd ever thought her life in Charleston was busy. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and child rearing. Henry started helping with small ranch chores as soon as he was able, learning about horses and cattle from his father. Emma demanded to do everything her older brother did, resulting in a tomboy who could ride and rope almost as well as any ranch hand by the time she was 8. Catherine continued her teaching, expanding to offer evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading and writing. Harrison and Catherine's love deepened with time, weathered by challenges but strengthened by shared experiences. They weathered droughts and cattle prices crashes, celebrated good years, and tightened their belts during hard ones. They supported each other through the loss of Harrison's older ranch hand to age and the heartbreak of a miscarriage between Emma and their third child, another son they named Michael. On their 10th anniversary, Harrison surprised Catherine by taking her back to Brownsville for a night away from the ranch and children. Senora Rosa, now graying but still formidable, agreed to watch the children. Harrison had reserved a room at the boarding house, coming full circle to where their story had begun. "Remember when you first arrived?" Harrison asked as they walked along the river at sunset. "You were so angry at that stage driver, so determined to get to Brownfield." "I remember," Catherine said, laughing. "I thought my life was ruined, being stranded in the wrong town." "And what do you think now?" Catherine looked up at her husband, at the lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun and the gray just starting to appear at his temples. She thought about their home, their children, the life they'd built together from nothing but love and determination. "I think it was the right town all along," she said. "I think I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be, even though it wasn't in your plans." "Especially because it wasn't in my plans. The best things in life rarely are." Catherine stood on her toes to kiss him. "That stage driver did me the biggest favor of my life, even if he didn't mean to." They stood there by the river as the sun set, the same river where they'd had their first real conversation about the future. So much had changed since then, but the fundamentals remained the same. They loved each other, they'd built something meaningful together, and they were happy. As they walked back toward town, Harrison's arm around Catherine's waist, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd left Charleston seeking safety and security with her aunt. Instead, she'd found adventure, challenge, and a love deeper than she'd ever imagined. She'd been forced to become stronger, braver, more resourceful than she'd ever thought possible. The years continued to pass. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's gift with horses. He eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, bringing her to live on the expanding Dalton ranch. Emma, true to her fierce nature, became a teacher herself, taking over Catherine's school and expanding it into a proper schoolhouse that served the whole region. Michael, the youngest, inherited his mother's love of books and ended up studying law in San Antonio, though he returned to Brownsville to practice and remained close to the family. Harrison and Catherine grew old together on the ranch they'd built. Harrison's hair turned silver, and his movements became slower, but he never lost his love for horses or his devotion to Catherine. Catherine's hands became gnarled with age, but they still reached for Harrison's every evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Henry and his wife had 4 children of their own now, all learning the ranching business. Emma had never married, but had devoted herself to education and had influenced hundreds of children over the years. Michael brought his wife and 3 children from town. The ranch house, expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family, rang with laughter and conversation. That evening, after the younger grandchildren had been put to bed, and the adult children were cleaning up from supper, Harrison and Catherine slipped away to their favorite spot by the corral fence. The gray gelding Harrison had been training when they first met. Stormcloud had lived to a ripe old age and was buried under a tree nearby. His descendants grazed in the pasture now, carrying on his line. 40 years, Catherine said, leaning against Harrison's shoulder. How did that happen? One day at a time, Harrison replied. One moment at a time, just like everything else. Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if that stage driver hadn't dropped me in the wrong town? Catherine asked. Harrison considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But then I remember what I told you that first day. What did you tell me? That this town had me in it. Harrison turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Catherine, every moment of the past 40 years has been a gift. Every challenge we've faced, every joy we've celebrated, every ordinary day we've spent together. I wouldn't change a single thing because it all led us here. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. After 40 years, this man could still make her heart flutter with his words. I love you, Harrison Dalton. I've loved you since you were a cocky cowboy who thought he could charm a stranded Charleston lady. I did charm her, Harrison pointed out with a grin. Worked pretty well if I do say so myself. Oh, it worked, Catherine agreed. But only because you backed up the charm with genuine kindness and love. You showed me what real partnership looks like, what it means to build a life with someone. They stood there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the land they'd worked and the family they'd raised. In the house behind them, they could hear their children laughing, their grandchildren playing. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down through generations of Daltons who would carry on the legacy. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them. A woman who'd been stranded in the wrong town and a cowboy who'd seen her as a gift from fate. They'd taken a chance on love when it would have been easier to walk away. They'd built something lasting and beautiful from nothing but hope and hard work. Thank you, Catherine whispered. For what? For being in this town that day. For seeing me, really seeing me and choosing to love me anyway. For 40 years of partnership and joy and love. Harrison kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips in the way he'd done countless times over 4 decades. The pleasure has been entirely mine, Mrs. Dalton. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd stand on that depot platform every single time, waiting for that stage to arrive. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Catherine reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her to this life. She'd thought she was heading toward a safe, predictable existence in Brownsville. Instead, she'd found adventure, purpose, and a love story for the ages in Brownsville. The town had seemed wrong at first, dusty and small and foreign to everything she'd known. But it had contained exactly what she needed. A good man with a kind heart, a community that welcomed her, and the opportunity to become someone she'd never imagined she could be. She'd become a teacher, a rancher's wife, a mother, and eventually a matriarch of a family that would carry on long after she was gone. Sometimes the wrong turn leads you to exactly the right place. Sometimes being stranded in an unexpected town opens doors you never knew existed. And sometimes a cowboy's simple declaration that this town has him in it now is the beginning of a love story that lasts a lifetime. Catherine and Harrison lived many more years together, growing old gracefully on their ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. They died within months of each other, Harrison first and then Catherine, both peacefully in their sleep. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree where they'd often sat together. Their descendants continued to thrive in Brownsville and beyond, carrying forward the legacy of hard work, education, and family that Catherine and Harrison had established. The ranch remained in the family for generations, and Catherine's school became a permanent institution, eventually growing into one of the finest educational establishments in the region. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Texas prairie and the wind whispers through the grass, locals swear they can see two figures sitting on the porch of the old Dalton ranch house. A cowboy and his lady, still holding hands after all these years, still in love as deeply as they were on the day a stage driver made a mistake that turned out to be the most beautiful accident of two people's lives. The story of Catherine and Harrison became legend in Brownsville, told and retold to new generations. It became the story people pointed to when they talked about fate, about love, about taking chances on the unexpected. Because sometimes the wrong town is exactly the right place, and sometimes a chance meeting changes everything. Their great-great-grandchildren still visit the ranch, still read from the books in Catherine's library, still train horses using the methods Harrison developed. The legacy they built together continues, a testament to what two people can create when they choose love over fear, adventure over security, and partnership over independence. And it all started with a stage driver's mistake, a dusty platform, and a cowboy who said the right words at exactly the right moment. "This town has me in it now." Those 7 words changed 2 lives and created a love story that would echo through generations, proving that sometimes the best destinations are the ones we never plan to reach.